Have you had a failed launch? If so, you're definitely not alone. But the big question is, how are you going to move forward from here? Keep listening, as that's what I'm covering on this episode today. Welcome to the Lou Blakely Show. You're in the right place if you're a service provider who is ready to transition into a more freedom-based business model with digital products. In this podcast, I share with you a unique combination of launch strategy, energetics, and mindset to create true, long-lasting success. It's time to ditch the burnout for good, create the business that you truly want, and share it with the world. Let's get started. Welcome to the latest episode of The Lou Blakely Show, the podcast where you'll learn how to use strategy, mindset, and your energetic alignment to create your dream online business. Today I'm talking all about failed launches. I recently met someone at a networking event, and when they asked what I do, their first question, when I told them what I did, was, "What's your take on failed launches?" Now, the reason they were asking is because they said they'd tried to launch twice and they found that both times for whatever reason, their launch didn't take off and they considered it a failure. But they found that no one really wants to talk about failed launches, and they hadn't really heard any experts actually address failed launches. So here I am today talking all about failed launches. Now, this episode may also be useful to you if you haven't launched yet at all, and maybe that pesky little thought of what if no one buys is popping up in the back of your head, which is extremely common, by the way. I think we have all felt like that at times. So, whether you've had a failed launch or you're about to go into a launch in the near future, then I think this is a topic that we really do need to talk about. So, you've had a failed launch, or you think you might have, and the first thing I want to say to you is, did it actually fail? Is it actually a failed launch? Or did it simply not live up to your expectations? And how did you go about choosing what your goal was? Because in order for it to be a failure, you have to have had a goal that you didn't hit, right? And that's why you've come to the conclusion that it's a failure. So how did you choose your launch goal? And how far away from the actual launch goal were you? And were you able to reverse engineer the numbers that you should expect based on your audience size, your strategy, all that kind of stuff? Now, if you didn't and you're telling yourself that your launch failed, but you did get sales, then I really want to ask, is this actually a failed launch, or is your audience not big enough and you have to keep launching to get to the numbers that you want? Now, on the flip side of that, if you had no one buy, then yeah, you probably do consider that a failed launch. And really, this episode is all about how to actually move forward from that. So if you're not sure whether it failed or not, you did get sales, but you just weren't happy with them, then I want to ask you, have you done a launch debrief? And if so, what did that data tell you? What was your conversion rate? How many people off your launch list actually purchased the program, and what is that conversion rate? Now, anything over 1% is actually really normal. So if you think about how many people you had on your launch list, did you have 1% buy? I like to sit in the 2 to 5% range, obviously higher than 5, which you quite commonly hit. But I like to sit about the 2%, but 1% is actually normal in this industry. So do you know this kind of data? If you don't, then how do you know that you had a failed launch, apart from, in the scenario that no one bought? So I really suggest that you spend time doing a launch debrief, get to know your numbers, and it's when you get to know your numbers and the data, you're able to find holes in your launch strategy, what didn't work, what worked, and you're actually able to separate the launch results from your emotions. Because right now, if you're beating yourself up that you had a failed launch, then your emotions are taking hold, and we want to get out of that state and back into strategic thinking, solution-focused thinking. So what were those gaps? And if you haven't done a launch debrief yet, just go and do it, please. Because until that point, we don't know that it's failed. Okay, so the problem with a failed launch, actually, the big problem with failed launches is not actually that your launch failed, it's how you're dealing with that, right? So sometimes a failed launch can stop us in our tracks, and more often than not, a failed launch means that we won't launch again, possibly ever. And I think this is a really good time to actually mention that this is 100% why I recommend pre-selling your new online course, your group coaching program, whatever it is that you're launching. You really need to be aware that this is why we are testing the offer and getting customers before we spend months creating videos, creating all of the content, that kind of stuff. And if you did have a failed launch and you did create the content beforehand, then I really do feel for you. And that's a big lesson for you too. Like, there is a reason that most launch experts will recommend that you pre-sell, and this is exactly why. And as I said, failed launches happen to everyone. Like, everyone I know in the online space has had a failed launch in some way, shape, or form, whether that's a perceived failed launch or an actual, like, just a dud. And obviously there's changes in the market, like the market is shifting all of the time. There's things going on outside of our control as well. So sometimes it's not just that no one wants the offer, but there's other things at play here too. But at the end of the day, it's actually about how we move forward rather than the fact that we've had a failed launch. So how can we move forward powerfully? So it's not so much about the fact that our launch is a failure according to either real data, our emotions, or the fact that nobody bought. It's what it brings up. Okay, so a failed launch can make us think that we're not good enough, that no one cares, that we're not cut out for this. And it can really bring up all sorts of feelings of rejection. Now, rejection is a huge thing that all of us have experienced in our life. And, you know, with these unconscious beliefs, unlimiting beliefs that we are carrying around with us and these unconscious thoughts that are running through our brains, there is something related to rejection there that happened between the ages of like 0 to 7 that will actually make it very easy for you to go back into that kind of rejection emotion. But the reality is that your course launch has nothing to do with you as a human being. I think that's something that we really need to sit with, is that our launches do not dictate our worth. They do not tell us how popular we are. They've got nothing to do with that. Like, at the end of the day, you're selling a product. People in the marketplace either wanted it or they didn't, or you didn't get in front of them, which comes back to your audience size. So it's actually nothing to do with you. Yet it's so common for people to go into this almost like depression-like state after a launch. And, you know, we do put a lot into launches and it can be a lot of effort and energy. And for it to not work out can be gutting. Like, I'm not taking away from that. But we need to separate it from who we are. It actually means nothing about us. And quite often what happens in this state is that we don't launch again. We don't do the work. We don't do the debrief. We don't look at how we can tweak the offer. We don't look at how we can improve our message, that kind of thing. Instead, we'll go, well, the launch failed. I suck. I'm going to be depressed for the next week. And then I'm going to emerge from my cave and I'm just going to go back to my one-on-one work. That is not the solution. So how do you actually move past that? The first thing is that we need to recognize the part that our ego is playing in this failed launch. Like, our ego is hurt right now. Your ego is also going to keep you small and stuck and in that victim mode around your failed launch, instead of being able to shift into that high-level thinking, solution-based thinking around data, identifying the problem, like finding the gaps, and then looking, well, I know the gaps now. I know what the problem is. What is the solution? And then keep moving forward. You really need to adopt that mindset that this is where I'm going. This is my vision. I want to have an online course that makes me X amount of dollars a year. Nothing is going to get in my way, not even my own ego. Because what happens with our ego is we make it mean things that aren't even true. So I said before, it does not mean that you're not a good person. It does not mean that you're not worthy or anything like that. It does not mean that you're not cut out for this. It doesn't mean any of that. It's simply a failed launch. There's always going to be a series of failures, whether you're using this business model or you're doing other business models. Like even with my Airbnb, I had failures, right? Like, I shouldn't have done that. And every single time, no matter what business model we're in, we need to be learning the lessons and then moving forward. And the reality is, the quicker we learn the lessons and move on, the better. We can sometimes just dwell and dwell and dwell on this stuff and not move forward, and that is only hurting ourselves. So simply recognize that your ego is hurt here, acknowledge it, and then shift into that solution-based thinking. Get to know your data, all of that kind of stuff, because that is what is going to help you here, and you do not want to be sitting and dwelling on this for months and months and months. Now, you may also be experiencing some kind of embarrassment and shame. So it's a big deal to decide that you're going to finally launch your course. You're going to do it. You're going to create that course. You're going to put it out there, and you're finally going to claim your space. Put up your hand, get visible, and say, I have this amazing offer. You've probably told your biz besties and other people that you're launching your online course. You've got them all on board, and let's face it, there is a lot of work involved, especially in that first launch where you're creating things for the first time, like your sales page, your checkout cart, your emails, all of that stuff. And just on a side note there, the following launches are always going to be easier than your first. Okay, but the thing is, we put so much work into that first launch, and then if that fails, whether that's a real failure or a perceived failure, you can experience a feeling of shame. It's kind of related to the ego as well, right? So I just want to say that firstly, no one knows unless you've actually told them, so you don't need to actually feel embarrassed. Like, people from the outside looking in will have no idea that you didn't sell. You do not need to be sharing your launch results online. You absolutely do not. I know that a lot of people do. You do not need to do that. And if your launch is a failure, you do not need to share that either. And that kind of eliminates the embarrassment. Do people actually need to know this? You can keep it to yourself. I know that having no one show up to things, like maybe you run a webinar or challenge and didn't have many signups, or you got no one showing up live to a masterclass or a workshop, I know that can feel really embarrassing and debilitating to moving forward. But here's some food for thought. It's happened to absolutely everyone online. It's happened to me. It's happened to the biggest people that you follow online. It's happened to everyone. Okay? And when it comes to shame, your launch results mean absolutely nothing about you. Like I said before, they don't mean that you're unlikable, you're not good enough, you're not worthy. None of it. It does not mean that. Simply a product. Can you imagine if, like, say, a biscuit company created a new biscuit and they put it out to the market and it didn't go so well, that they're going to say, oh my God, like, we just shouldn't be here. Like, we should just close up our whole business because we got rejected. Our biscuit wasn't accepted and nobody wanted to buy it. Like, I know that's a funny example, and yeah, it just came to me then, but it's the same thing, right? We need to separate our emotions from this situation. And then once we realize it's actually not about us, then we can move forward. And the quicker we can do that, the better. So how do you actually move forward in a really powerful way from a failed launch? So mindset-wise, there's a few things that I recommend. First is understand that your results mean nothing about you, and to detach from those results, realize that they don't mean anything about you, and also detach from future results. Like, your results are not you, and any failures are not you, and it also means that any wins aren't you. It's just business, right? So how can you remove the emotions from your results? So simply stop looking at this as though it's something personal, because it's not. It's just business, economics, commerce, whatever you want to call it. You had an offer, it didn't get any bites, it doesn't mean anything about you and your worth. And also, sometimes it just means that you actually have to tweak some things about your offer, okay? Next thing, let's ditch the ego. Like, our ego is hurt. I understand that. But you can spend weeks, months, even a year wallowing on this, or you can just decide, I'm moving forward regardless, and I'm going to try again, and I'm going to do it differently. That launch debrief is going to really give you the feedback you need in order to do that, by the way. The key is don't let it hold you back. You are powerful, and choosing to move forward from your failed launch is something your future self is going to be so thankful for. So keep going, learn the lessons. You can totally do this. Now, from a practical sense, do that debrief, like find the gaps, revisit your offer, do some market research with your ideal client so you can tweak that offer. Ask your audience why they didn't buy. Get that information and then use that to improve your offer, pivot your offer, improve your positioning and messaging and all of that stuff. So, there's no end to what you can find out when you do market research, and it can be really interesting. I'd start by sending a survey to your list, to your email list, but also try and get on the phone with people and really dig deep into why they didn't buy, because some of the surface level stuff that they tell you will not be true. But at the end of the day, if people don't buy, it means that we haven't communicated the value of the offer enough, and that is what the whole launch strategy, the marketing part of the launching strategy is all about. How are we communicating the value? Because nobody is spending money on something that they don't see the value in. Another thing you can do is hire support. So get some help with strategy. Get some help actually doing a really thorough debrief if you don't know how to do one. Because going it alone, trying to cobble together an offer and a launch strategy by yourself may have actually been the reason that your launch hasn't worked. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I really do feel like if you're in this stage, in this phase of a failed launch, you actually need some tough love. I know in the past when I've had failed launches, I have done both things actually. I have let it really get me down, and also I have just gone whatever and moved forward and moved on to the next thing after doing a debrief. And the second choice is way better, and something I wish that I knew much earlier, rather than wallowing in this like feeling sorry for myself type state. Like nothing good comes from that place. Yes, spend a day there, but then get into solution mode and move on. It does not mean that you can't be successful in this space. It just means that you haven't quite found the secret sauce yet. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you're enjoying the Lou Blakely Show, please take a moment to rate and review it in Apple Podcasts. These ratings really help me get this podcast in front of more people, which means I'll be able to create even more free content for you. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you have a great week, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thanks, course creators and go-getters. You're incredible, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you haven't done so already, make sure you hit subscribe in your podcast app so you don't miss an episode. If you'd like to find out more about what I offer, head across to loublakely.com. See you next time.